Okay, we move to page number 2. Criteria for evaluating alternatives. The next sheet is fairly straightforward in that its main purpose is to get you to begin developing the list of criteria that are significant traits, features, values, qualities, etc. You will need to compare and contrast the alternatives against one another in order to determine which one is the better option. This is what you will want to begin compiling in the main center section of this sheet. And as we scroll down, you can see the center section is the biggest one. When you first start compiling your own criteria, you will most likely have a list of criteria categories which you will work to define and quantify acceptable and unacceptable boundaries for later on. To use our printer scenario, we might consider cost, such as day-to-day operations and long-term maintenance, etc., performance categories such as printing speed, DPI quality, technological life, or the amount of time until it will be too outdated to use, user interface, dependability, usability, and so on. Above the center section and below it are two supplemental categories that you might also find helpful to record and include in the proposal, even if in a more minimal degree than the main criteria list. The uppermost section asks for the overall goal of an effective solution. One way to think about this is to consider what you would say if you could answer what an effective solution would be in one sentence versus a more detailed criteria list like that which will follow in the center section. In our printer example, we might create a statement that an overall goal would be to replace the aging printers with contemporary printers with the latest technological features, software drivers, and competitive performance abilities that will be cost effective and not need to be replaced for a minimum of 5 years. Now that does sound like a list, but if necessary, we could just use the first phrase to replace the aging printers with contemporary printers with modern speed and technological. Finally, at the bottom of the sheet, you will want to state the rationale behind selecting the two alternatives you have as the best two to address the situational demands. Here you could mention some of the alternatives you decided not to include in the final evaluation. Again, in the real world, you would probably likely not find yourself only including two products or alternatives to compare and contrast in a report such as this, but you will find yourself narrowing the field considerably to a reasonable number of alternatives to compare and contrast, and in doing so you will need to explain why you chose to compare and contrast the alternatives that you did, and this will help you to refine your skills and develop your skills toward that end. Page 3 is analysis of alternatives. This next page of your project planning worksheet centers upon the two alternatives that you have chosen to analyze, compare, and contrast in your analytical report. On the last page, detail why these two alternatives were the most appropriate to address scenarios' situational demands. And on this page, you will want to provide as much specific detail about each alternative as you can at this point in the semester and in your project. This detail about your alternatives is information that often appears in both the proposal and the analytical report, even though probably in modified form. You will most certainly need to continue to gather more information about each of your alternatives as you move ahead in your report project, but the information you gather for this sheet will hopefully provide you a good base of information to build upon. When compared to all the other pages in the project planning sheets, the analysis of alternatives sheet is perhaps the one that never remains contained to just one page. That is because the section provided for the general description of each alternative is the same size as all the other sections included, but requires a space at least 3 times the section's present size. Depending upon what your alternatives are, products, procedures, techniques, theoretical approaches, etc., you can see how a 1-inch space will not be a large enough one to hold all the details about an alternative you would likely wish to include in your proposal and report. That said, the other 4 categories could also potentially take up additional space as well, as the alternatives you will analyze, compare, and contrast will be at the center of any report you will write. The sections on this sheet are worthy of as much effort as you can put into them, even at this early stage of your project. Although the other categories here are fairly straightforward, they are worth working through to make sure you are beginning the process of evaluating each one of them even before you start writing the official report. So the first one we already discussed is the basic description of alternative 1. This is the one that should be at least 3 times this size, and most people find it much, much longer and detailed than that. These usually end up being 3/4 of a page. The second section asks you to list and describe the ways that the alternative will address the specific situational needs you have detailed out earlier. In the next 2 sections, you will list the positive consequences the alternative will add and the negative consequences it will eliminate. And in the final section in each alternative segment of the sheet is reserved as a place to compare it against the other alternative. Although you might not use the contents of this category directly in the proposal itself, it will nonetheless give you a head start in your work, analyzing, comparing, and contrasting the 2 alternatives in your report. You might, of course, need to wait until you have filled out the rest of the other sections about both of the alternatives before having the actual ability to truly take a look at their merits side by side, however.